This is the Sports Sit-Down with Mike Damergis.
All right, Mike Damergis here along with Dom Amore from the Hartford Courant. Dom, you know the Yankees well, you know the Mets well. You have a Hall of Fame vote. Carlos Beltran enters the Hall of Fame along with Andruw Jones and Jeff Kent. Jeff Kent, of course, by special committee. To be honest, off the top, I'm a little surprised Beltran got in because of the stuff that went on with Houston with the cheating scandal years back. What's your take on that?
Well, the way I looked at that was, a lot of people today might compare that to the steroids issue, which has kept a lot of people out of the Hall of Fame. And, I think the steroids issue scandal really stigmatized anything that can be considered cheating, right? So anything that's against the rules that's done, a lot of times people will think, well, that's automatically disqualifying for something like this. But I tended to make a comp to Gaylord Perry. All right, no one ever batted an eyelash when he went into the Hall of Fame, even though he had a long history of cheating. Right? I mean, loading up the ball. He was ejected, ironically, only once for loading up the ball, but.
And he proudly admitted he cheated.
He proudly admitted, right? And he was in the Hall of Fame.
Yes.
And although it wasn't well known until a Wall Street Journal expose 50 years later, it was well known within baseball, and it wasn't a secret, that the 51 Giants were using illegal means to steal signs. And when they made their big comeback against the Dodgers. And in fact, the manager who masterminded that, Leo DeRocher, was put in the Hall of Fame largely because of that achievement of winning that pennant. Mm-hmm. So the way I kind of differentiate it, Mike, is that infractions that occur on the field in the ballpark are to be policed on the spot by umpires and opposing managers and coaches and players. Right? If you're caught putting something on the ball, you're warned and ejected. If you're caught corking a bat, you're warned and ejected. If you throw at a hitter intentionally or spike an infielder, you're ejected or disciplined that way. So there's ample opportunity to discipline. First of all, sign stealing itself is not illegal. It was only the means that they used. But teams are supposed to protect their signs once it becomes obvious that they're being stolen. So I felt like that particular cheating scandal, as bad as it was and as big a ruckus as it caused in 2020, probably shouldn't preclude someone from going into the Hall of Fame. That was my take on Beltran from the beginning, and I'd been a consistent voter for Beltran.
So 435 career home runs, 279 average, some great postseasons, particularly early on with Houston. He was a monster. Do you feel his punishment has been served by him not getting the Mets manager? So you're feeling his punishment is done and let's move forward?
Certainly. And honestly, he probably should get another chance somewhere to manage if he was that highly thought of by the Mets that year. He's one of those guys that didn't hit any of those benchmarks that you associate with a Hall of Famer, but he did a lot of everything. He hit a lot of home runs. He was a great defensive player. He stole a lot of bases. He got a lot of hits. When you look at the levels he reached in 6 or 7 different categories, there's only a couple of other players who've done it. So, one gray area today, Mike, though, too, is that when a guy does play for a lot of teams and is not really identified with one team, sometimes you forget how good a player he was because he moves around a lot. Whereas a guy that's like a face of a franchise player, and I tend to give extra credit for guys like that, it's more readily apparent how good they were.
when I think of Beltran, I think of 2006 and LCS. I was working for XM Radio at the time.
Yeah.
I'm in the tunnel working with Buck Martinez, a great broadcaster, former Kansas City Royal and Blue Jay. And I just remember the silence in Shea Stadium when he struck out. And that Mets team should have won a World Series.
It should have, yeah. It's funny that you say that, because I always would say, I always voted for Goose Gossage, but I understood why people didn't vote for him, because when you think of Goose Gossage, the first three things you think about are 2 home runs to George Brett and 1 home run to Kirk Gibson.
There you go.
Right. So Beltran had that one moment, but he's a great postseason player.
Yeah, Goose owned Beltran. I mean, Gibson for the part.
Yeah.
Brett not so much. Brett kind of had his head. Moving along to Andruw Jones, another guy, 10 Gold Gloves, but you look at the home runs, 434. Going back to history of the world with Dom DeLuise, nice, not thrilling, but nice, 250, two average. What's your take on him? How'd you go with him?
Yeah, I was slow to come around on him. But one thing I like to do as a voter, as time goes on, I don't like to vote to keep people out. I like to vote to put people in. So when I see somebody get a lot of support from my colleagues among the voters and I have a tremendous amount of respect for this organization, very proud to be a member of it. I will say, well, you know what, maybe they see something that I don't. And so, for instance, I did not vote for Chase Utley, but he got a tremendous amount of support, especially from first-time voters. So I don't want to have him fall 3 or 4 votes short, and I'm one of the 3 or 4 that are one of the ones that voted against him. So I'm going to have to take a different look at him next year. But with Andruw Jones, he got the 10 Gold Gloves, and I suppose Gold Gloves can be dubious, when the players and managers voted on them, they would make terrible choices, right? I mean, there's the year that Palmeiro won the Gold Glove at first base.
20 games at first base, right?
Exactly. So they made terrible choices, right? So now they do it with metrics, and metrics is far from a perfect way to do it, because a lot of times, for instance, outfielders get credit in the metrics for playing deep and catching balls out there, and they're not penalized for balls that drop in. So a lot of outfielders manipulate their metrics by playing deep and end up with a Gold Glove. There are a few examples of that in recent years. So there's no perfect way to determine how good a defensive player someone is. But Andruw Jones was a great center fielder by both the metrics and the eyeball test, and the respect of his peers. There's absolutely no disagreement that he was an historically good defensive player. So I look at those 10 Gold Gloves as very legit, and 400 home runs is a lot of home runs. They put a lot of guys in recently, like Dick Allen and Dave Parker, nowhere near 400 home runs. So it's one reason why I think Dwight Evans should be in the Hall of Fame, 390 home runs. And again, no argument that he was an elite defensive player. I'm digressing here, but I just think that combination, when you do look at Andruw Jones, the batting average hurt him for a long time. The home runs were kind of scrunched together in a few years. He had a few big years.
That means he was one of the best players in the game. He didn't stretch it out, so he's one of the best game. Right. And I think of Andruw Jones. I think of that '96 World Series.
Yeah. He was on a winning team. He was on one of the best. He was on maybe the best team of the decade. That team has an awful lot of representation. By the way, for a team that only won once, whereas the Yankees, who won 5 times in that era, do not have that kind of reputation. Well, which will get to one of my other picks on this ballot. But I just thought that the support that Jones had and the credentials he had, I couldn't see keep voting to keep him out, and so he's in, and that saves one group. One thing I do want to point out, though, this is somewhat true of Beltran. It's true of Jones. It's true of many others. Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, those guys didn't need email campaigns to get in the Hall of Fame, right? So we're talking about a lot of borderline players. There's an argument for it. There's an argument against it, and we should be respectful of both arguments when we vote. If Jones didn't get in, I would have had no objection. I have no objection to him getting in. Same thing with Utley. I would have no objection if he got in. I didn't vote for him this time, but there's certainly an argument for and against almost every player on this ballot.
In your mind, are there guys, and before we get to the final inductee, Jeff Kent, 377 home runs, 290 average, okay second baseman. Are there guys out there that you feel that should get in? I mean, there's talk of Hernandez and Mattingly because of the defense.
Yeah.
Is there anybody sitting around that you're like, how is this guy not in?
I'll tell you who I would put in before Mattingly or Hernandez, and that's Thurman Munson. We hear a lot. It's almost assumed now that Buster Posey is going to be a slam dunk for the Hall of Fame, right? Not unfairly. I'd probably vote for him. But Thurman Munson, who was on and off the ballot before my time, his numbers stack up very, very well with Posey. Not only conventional numbers, but also the metrics. His WAR, if that's what you're going by, the equivalent of almost anybody. 10-year period that he played, boy, he packed a lot into that. A Rookie of the Year, an MVP, championship seasons. Obviously, he was the face of a franchise, captain of the Yankees. He has all those bells and whistles, but his numbers, Gold Gloves, he won, right? Won a whole season, made only one error because Boog Powell knocked him unconscious at home plate. He's the one guy I think I would prioritize putting in if I were the Veterans Committee. The trend right now, particularly with the Veterans Committees, is to favor short-term greatness over the long-term excellence. So I think the voters at the time didn't think that Hernandez or Mattingly had the long-term excellence to get in. Their overall numbers, and they had long, particularly Mattingly. After his 4 or 5 peak years were done, he had a lot of kind of average to below average years at first base, and first base is a stacked position for the Hall of Fame. So again, I would have no objection to those guys getting in, but I would prioritize Munson over them.
You talk about Munson, bench and Fisk Hall of Fame. Munson hit 40 points higher than bench career.
Yeah.
He was higher than Fisk. Munson was kind of in between bench and Fisk. Munson, 290 lifetime hitter. Good years would hit 17 to 20 home runs, 100 RBIs, about 315. So he was kind of in between. And the question always was, and that's one thing I want to do a podcast on with some former players and get some writers on. Who was the best catcher at the time, bench, Munson, or Fisk? That was the era when catcher kind of ruled. And you look at those teams. Well, how many teams went to the World Series with those players?
Yeah. Well, Munson. I think that the thing that must have hurt him with voters was that he appeared to be. His production really dropped his last couple of years. And I think the perception was and is.
Actually, it was just his last year in 79.
It was last year and a half. I think he
banged up.
Yeah. But, he had a lot of injuries at that time. And, Fisk was considered done around that time, too. And he ended up catching till he was 42. So it would not have, Munson might very well have rebounded, got himself healthy, and played several more years and had good years had he not been killed in the crash. So but of course you can't necessarily vote on what you think might happen, but he packed an awful lot into 10 years, and I would favor him. But a lot of guys, with 300 and something home runs, and with other things going on like Rocky Colavito, and we've mentioned Dwight Evans, and Dale Murphy with 400 home runs.
I mean, you think of Dale Murphy. Yeah. Baseball in the 70s and 80s, and Dale Murphy was the premier center fielder at the time.
Yeah, but another guy that kind of fell off a cliff,
Mhm.
and he's kind of remembered for that, which is unfortunate. So yeah, but there are a lot of guys in that. Frank Howard had a lot of great years and 380 home runs and was the face of a franchise and played on championship teams. And Boog Powell was an MVP and a big part of a dynasty, and he did 340 home runs. A lot of players from that era that you deserve a fresh look in light of some of the people who've been put in. On the pitching side, Louis Tiant comes to mind as somebody who, not only for his what he accomplished, but just for kind of who he was, and it is a Hall of Fame, and kind of his impact on the game. And I'll tell you another guy going way back, I would really love to see get in is Lefty O'Doul. He had a short career, but a tremendous career, 349 average. And of course, he was a tremendous ambassador for bringing baseball to Japan, which we know the impact of that, the legacy of that today. So I would love to see one of these committees, whichever one would be the appropriate one, take a good look at him.
Yeah, and Boog Powell, of course, Brooks Robinson in the Hall of Fame. A lot of scoops over there from Brooks to give him all those gold gloves too.
Yeah.
So let's not forget that. Final inductee, the selection committee, Jeff Kent, all-time home run leader from second baseman, hit 100 more home runs than Joe Morgan, 290 lifetime hitter. Why did it take so long to get him in? And what was your process? Did you vote for him early on?
I voted for Kent. I think 9 out of 10 years. One of the things that really hurt guys like Kent is that you had this glut of steroids-tainted players that never got in and never fell off the ballot. So for voters who went all or nothing on those 6, 7, 8 steroids guys those years, they didn't have any boxes left to check other people. So you see guys like Jorge Posada, Carlos Delgado, Bernie Williams fell off the ballot because people didn't have room to vote for them if they were voting for all the steroids guys. So what I did was I would vote for Bonds and Clemens, but not the others, on the theory that if Bonds and Clemens weren't in, then Manny, A-Rod, McGuire, Sosa, they shouldn't be in. And so that would give me an opportunity to vote for guys I wanted to vote for, like Jeff Kent. So I voted for Jeff Kent every year. I voted for Bonds and Clemens, and then I voted for a Jeff Kent, a Larry Walker, some of the other guys who got in. But a lot of guys didn't have room. Guys who stuck to the all or nothing on the steroids guys didn't have room to vote for people like Jeff Kent. But he had a number of monster seasons at second base, just monster seasons. You could say he wasn't a great defensive player there, but teams kept him there. They didn't DH him. They didn't move him to first. They kept him at second base. He couldn't have been that terrible. But Pete Caldera mentioned to me that, if you voted for Jeff Kent, you should vote for Chase Utley. And I split the difference because for me, Kent played one more year than Utley. He had 600 more hits, 120 more home runs. He was an MVP, so, and he was an all-star, I think 8 out of 9 years at one stretch. So I voted for Kent. I thought he was deserving. And I was glad to see the Veterans Committee. If the Veterans Committee is going to put in the guys that we don't put in, I'm glad they put him in rather than maybe put some of the other guys in that you could perceive as, well, we're going to spite the writers and put this guy in. I thought that was a very astute choice by the Veterans Committee, not necessarily because I voted for him, although I certainly think it was an astute choice.
So what's the criteria to go to the Veterans Committee? Is it 15 years of voting by the writers, and if you don't get in, you go to the Veterans Committee?
It's 10 years. It was 15 years for a long time. It was changed to 10. I was not in favor of that, and I still do not like it. I think it was done because, because the steroids guys were going to start getting in, the way it was trending. And so they cut it off at 10 to get Bonds and Clemens off the ballot after 10 years. I didn't like it because I think every year Well, every year, older writers either pass away or they drop out of the voting pool, and new voters come in. And I like to see a player on there for 15 years so that a second generation of voters has a chance to voice their opinion on that player. A lot of players got in between their 10th and their 15th year. And there's nothing wrong with that. People say, well, how does a guy who doesn't get in the first year get in? He doesn't get any better. Well, no, he doesn't get any better, but newer, younger voters come in and get to voice their opinion on it. So I do wish that players were still on our ballot for 15 years, but they're off at 10, and then they go to the various veterans committees, and as time goes on, the way it is now, they've changed this several times, but the way it is now, there's a committee for more recent players, a committee for players further back. There's several committees that rotate on a year-to-year basis. One thing I want to point out, because it's forgotten, but the original Veterans Committee was kind of done away with because of the perception that they were just putting their friends in. Mm-hmm. So they tried to do a Veterans Committee that was all living Hall of Famers voting. And for 6 years, that group never inducted anyone.
Yeah,
living Hall of Famers do not like to add new Hall of Famers.
Yeah, Joe Morgan was very outspoken.
That's not the answer either. People say, well, why do the writers vote? Why don't you have the Hall of Famers vote? They'll never put anybody in.
Where do we stand now as far as the steroid users? I mean, are we going to move past it, or is this going to be, it's going to remain the same as keeping them out?
To me, it's in the hands of the Veterans Committee. If they put Bonds and Clemens in, I would then vote for the others. But to me, it's in the hands of the Veterans Committee. The Veterans Committee has twice rejected Bonds and Clemens. Now Manny Ramirez is going to be in their hands. I assume if they haven't put in Bonds and Clemens, they're not going to put in Manny Ramirez. Soon A-Rod will be in their hands, and McGuire and Sosa, all those. So the way I see it, it's in their hands now. I do think that a day will come when the Veterans Committee will put a lot of those guys in. And the reason I say that, Mike, is because the Hall of Fame is a museum. It's a business. A big part of its business is the induction ceremonies. And these induction ceremonies are starting to become very, very flat for the lack of star power.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at, you've got Carlos Beltran, Andruw Jones, and Jeff Kent going in this year. It's hard to imagine 1 million people filling that field for those three, taking nothing away from them.
And let's do it while they're alive.
But imagine Bonds and Clemens getting in the Hall of Fame, what that would mean. So I do think that the day will come when maybe when newer, younger people get involved, and especially if attendance goes down. A lot of people are turned off by guys not being in the Hall of Fame. So same thing with Pete Rose. The day will probably come when Pete Rose is put in, and it'll be a big, big deal because for the reasons I mentioned, it'll add juice to the induction ceremony and a new reason to go to the museum, which is what it's there for.
Yeah, and then it brings up, if you're going to put Rose in, Shoeless Joe Jackson belongs in too. Then
again, there is a difference there. Shoeless Joe Jackson was actually proven to have thrown a World Series, and he did take money. I mean, there's some question about who did what in 1919, but I don't think there's a question that he was tossed out for cause.
His stats though were otherwise, as far as the number of hits he got, and he had very good
for sure. I mean, he's certainly a Hall of Fame player. There's no doubt about that. But you're right. I mean, there may come a day when that happens too. But I do think that if you're going to have a Hall of Fame, the all-time hits leader is not in, the all-time home run leader is not in, 5 or 6 of the top 10 home run hitters are not in. A guy who won more Cy Young awards than Cy Young would have won is not in. It becomes a question: why have a Hall of Fame? I say put a lot of. If I were king of the world, I'd put those guys in. Explain on their plaque what what they did. But the idea of the Hall of Fame is to tell the story of baseball history. And how do you tell that story without Barry Bonds, without Roger Clemens, without Pete Rose?
Yeah, and I'm changing a little bit on it because it is a museum.
Yeah.
They've paid their price, I feel. And listen, if you can do a museum on the presidents of the United States, you're not going to have Richard Nixon in there because he was, tossed out of the White House. So
yeah, there you go.
Anyway, Dom Amore, thank you so much for this conversation about the Hall of Fame. Appreciate it.
You got it, Mike. Anytime.
Thank you.